So yeah, by way of introduction, I'm Nick Wilton. I'm the Dean of the Business School at Oxford Brookes, but also a Professor of Applied Human Resource Management as well. And what I'm going to talk about today is the notion of skill, and in particular, or in the second part of the session, talk about a project that I've been part of as part of the Innovation and Research Caucus, which is essentially a kind of cross-disciplinary, cross-institutional group of researchers concerned in particular with ideas around innovation in all its forms, both within organizations, within education, and that kind of the interface between those two areas. And it's a series of research projects that were kind of instigated by Innovate UK, and initially the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, but it's kind of spun on to a whole variety of things, looking at this particularly thorny issue around innovation skills. And I'll talk about why that's sort of important, I think, in a policy context as we go through. So it's worth saying, so the team is me, Professor Jen Nellers, and Dr. Kevin Walsh as well. All of us at Brookes have been working on this project for about the last 18 months. So firstly, I'm going to talk about the kind of skills agenda. I've sort of been fascinated with the idea of skill since I think my PhD actually, which is focused on employability skills amongst graduates and so on. And it's always slightly baffled me the way that skills gets used in kind of educational parlance and also in terms of government policy. So I'll talk a little bit about that, why that's a tricky area. Talk about innovation in policy as well. So innovation as a source of all manner of great things, whether it's prosperity, growth, social mobility, and so on. And then talk about the research program. I'm not going into a huge amount of details with the program in the research that we've been doing in a detailed sense, but talk about some of the things that we've had to grapple with in the course of coming up with what ultimately has become the innovation skills framework, and how we've gone about that in terms of defining what tasks are associated with innovation and the way in which we might prepare people to act and to enable more innovative ways of working, more innovative processes and so on. So innovation in its broadest possible sense. Then talk a little bit about the application of the framework. It's taken on a bit of a life of its own since we launched it about a year ago. And then talk about the latest development in the project, which is not the ISF, it's now the ICE framework. So I'm just going to put that as a tantalizing thing. So you stick around and work out what ICE stands for. So in terms of the policy context, those of you that are involved in higher education or further education, or indeed, watch the news regularly and look at policy pronouncement about how we're going to deal with all manner, as I said, of kind of economic and social problems, whether it's economic growth, whether it's prosperity, whether it's tackling immigration, reducing inward migration, and so on, whether it's social mobility, whether it's educational reform, and so on, and social exclusion. Skills is a sort of shorthand for a kind of policy panacea, as a kind of cure-all for all of these things, that if only we can develop the right skills amongst the right people and get them in the right place, all of these things will be resolved. If only we can get education to be developing the right skills, and putting them where they can be put to good use, then all of these things will be resolved. However, despite the fact that this is a very important, in policy terms, a very important concept and the idea of skill, quite often what's lacking in some of these policy pronouncements is a really very clear notion of what skills we're talking about. And indeed, it's an area of kind of academic insight about actually the idea of skill itself is quite often very ill-defined. There's a lack of consensus about, in a sense, what's in and what's out, and what the relationship is between skills, personal attributes, personality traits, a whole variety of different things, behaviors, values, and so on. And if you look at lots of frameworks of skills, quite often they tend to conflate all of these things. Also conflated in government policy is also something that's probably going on for the last 4 decades, really, is a conflation of of what we might historically call education and skills systems. So quite often when the government talks about skills or skills systems, they're talking about education system, talking about secondary, even primary, secondary, tertiary education, further higher education, and so on. And by doing this, there is a conflation of the fact that actually, or suggestion, if you like, that it's the responsibility of education systems, university schools and so on, and colleges, to produce the skills that are necessary to address all of these problems. And as a sort of an aside, really, what that quite often sort of relegates or excuses employers to is the role of advisors. And I've long kind of taken an interest in the extent to which employers claim dissatisfaction with the labour supply. You know, graduates don't have the skills we need. Colleges aren't doing what we need. We need different forms of education provision. So T-levels as an example of that, as a sort of response to employers. The whole employability agenda within universities is a direct response to apparent employer dissatisfaction with the product of universities, to the extent that, you know, whilst the kind of post-92s and newer universities were at the vanguard of that, increasingly that's pushed its way into more traditional research-intensive universities as well. But as far as employers are concerned, they are on the sidelines, if you like, throwing stones at universities, saying, give us more of what we want, and then we'll make use of it. And government tends to reinforce that particular narrative, which has the other kind of impact of slightly ignoring the role of employers in terms of developing skill themselves. And in terms of kind of non-technical skills, which is really what we're talking about here, we're not talking about the skills to innovate in computing or the skills to innovate in AI and so on. What we're talking about is the kind of non-technical skills that underpin an ability to function effectively in a very changeable, a challenging workplace. And so the language and nomenclature of skills is sort of ever changing. So we've gone from in '97, the Deering report, which kind of created all sorts of upheaval for our education, talked about core skills, and then we've been through transferable, key, soft, employability, future skills, enterprise skills, entrepreneurship skills, and now green skills, when, you know, and so on. So this whole area of skill is really a bit fuzzy, ultimately, in terms of the way it's used in policy. And so I'm not going to read these things, that this is the very latest in terms of where we're at. So one of the first things the new Labour government did when they came to power was create what they've called Skills England. So Skills England is going to replace IFATE, which was the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. And that sort of replacement is taking over. But you can see that this kind of skills agenda, this notion of skills as a kind of policy panacea, exactly what Keir Starmer and Bridget Phillipson said, he kind of bears this out. So in creating Skills England, they've got driving growth and widening opportunities. You've got the economic impact, you've got the social impact. And there is this strong suggestion that skills are at the heart of all of the country's ills in lots of ways, and so on. And so on. So it's skills is the thing that if you like, the kind of, you know, universities, education providers and employees kind of coalesce around, if you like, as the producers and the beneficiaries of a skills system, which Keir Starmer says is in a mess at the moment, despite decades and decades and decades of reform and so on, that we're still not necessarily producing the skills that we need. So that's the skills agenda. The other piece of what we've looked at is obviously innovation. And I won't go through, I've got 3 slides of these sorts of quotes just because I keep coming across them and keep adding them to this presentation. But again, just like skill, innovation itself is again a kind of panacea, as that first point says, catalyst for growth, prosperity and well-being, and is at the core of government economic policy. This tends to relate to the previous government, but there's no suggestion that the current government thinks any differently about innovation as the kind of critical driver of as I say, prosperity, growth, and so on. So there's an awful lot hung on the ability of the UK PLC to innovate, and for education systems, therefore, to deliver the ability to innovate, and so on. So you've got a whole bunch of statements there about the importance of innovation, and most recent one at the bottom there is IFATE's. So IFATE's future-facing innovation strategy. I'm not sure if it's still current anymore, given that they've just been replaced, but they last year launched their future-facing innovation strategy around technical education. And so where they said they would proactively work with employers, innovators, and foresighters to identify emerging technology and skills and quickly embed them in technical education. So it's about being responsive to the needs of employers to drive innovation by quick adoption of both necessary skills, but also the technologies needed for the underpin innovation. Other examples, which basically hung, obviously there are a whole variety of different drivers of innovation in organizations. They can be technological, they can be processes, they can be systems and so on, but there's an awful lot in here which is puts front and center the ability of individuals to innovate, and the notion of talent as the driver of innovation. So the most exciting place for innovative talent, as the UK was a kind of policy statement: innovative talent, innovation, talent and skills, one of the elements of its strong foundations, prioritising people and careers as one of the strategic objectives of the Innovate UK strategic delivery plan. And then finally, another bunch of quotes that all say pretty much the same thing. So the 2021 R&D People and Culture Strategy for the Department for Business, I can't remember what the E stands for, Education Industrial Strategy, specifically focused on people, arguing they're the core of R&D. There's nothing more important than attracting, developing, and retaining enough people to meet ambitions around innovation. So you've got two concepts, if you like, innovation on the one hand and skills on the other, which between them are carrying an awful lot of socioeconomic weight in the sense of what they're expected to deliver, and indeed for education providers to in a sense drive that forward by making sure that people were that the product of those education systems are capable of innovating in the context that they find themselves. So whether that's in terms of kind of what we might think of as kind of entrepreneurial innovation in terms of the development, creation of new products and services, but also entrepreneurial innovation in the sense of, you know, really developing processes or changing the way that organizations do things in new and interesting ways that realize efficiencies, that realize new and better ways of doing things. But it's worth saying that there is this real challenge in the sense that where you have a situation where skills is so weakly defined, what Innovate UK asked us to do as part of the Innovation Caucus, they realised that there was all these policy pronouncements that made reference to, in particular in the first instance, innovation skills, that those were at the heart of innovative policy and the heart of all of these important outcomes that these organisations were expected to deliver and that they'd expect educational providers to respond to. They realised they didn't have a solid definition or framework for the articulation of what those skills actually were. So what are innovation skills? What are the things that we need to be able to develop and apply within organisations in order to be innovative? So that was the start of our kind of series of projects. So we were tasked with developing an innovation skills framework by Innovate UK and IFATE. And that innovation skills framework is now actually part of the future-facing skills strategy of IFATE as a kind of core underpinning in terms of shaping future apprenticeship delivery. So we delivered the innovation skills framework, which I'm going to focus on in a second, but just to say that there were subsequent spin-offs. So UKRI were interested in understanding the extent to which entrepreneurship skills were being delivered to doctoral students. So if you have doctoral students that are, by definition, making contributions to knowledge and developing new ideas, new technologies, and so on, to what extent were they put in a position where they could commercialize that expertise and commercialize that insight? And so off the back of that, Innovate UK asked us to then develop the ISF to include entrepreneurship and commercialization. And that led to the development of the ICE framework, so Innovation, Commercialization, Entrepreneurship Skills Framework, which I'll mention at the end, but we're still in the process of kind of road testing that at the moment. So I talked about this sort of definitional challenges of skill, and that quote at the bottom kind of sums up the challenge here. And I've been looking at this for about the best part of 25 years, and this is a claim that was being made back then, and no one really has seemed to heeded this point, that what most people previously would have regarded as personal characteristics, such as attributes, attitudes, character traits, dispositions, values, and behaviors, are now being divided as skill. So skill, as the notion of skill, has been defined so broadly and problematically that it's not hugely inclusive, in the sense that it reinforces this idea, for example, around entrepreneurship, that people are born entrepreneurs, they're born with these skills, their character traits, and so on, and that's kind of notion that wrapped in the notion of skill. So you can see that obviously all of these things have different definitions, and so our starting point for looking at to develop the ISF was to say, well, actually, what's our definition of skill? Where do we draw the line? So if you take something like, for example, in the business school, we talk about students developing an enterprise or an entrepreneurial mindset. So that's fine. We're not discounting the idea of an entrepreneurial mindset as important for things like innovation and so on, but it is not a skill. It is something that can be developed to a certain extent, but it is not a predefined set of skills that we can very clearly identify where that might be covered in a particular program and so on. So we took quite a strict definition of skills and tried to focus the framework on developing on those personal capacities that can add value to a process, organization, or endeavor, that can be enhanced or developed through learning and development, that contributes to the completion of innovation-related tasks. So there's a lot to kind of unpack in that definition, but we've tried to make it both inclusive, but also, the way I've tended to describe it is taking it back to kind of primary colors, that actually, what are the fundamental building blocks of the abilities that are necessary to make innovation more likely in the application of a predefined set of tasks. So the idea of doing that was to make it as relevant across a whole range of contexts and roles and across organizational, educational levels. So we had two, if you like, anchors to the process. Once we had that definition, we started then mapping what the task associated with innovation were. And I'll come to that in a second. So what were the things that the people had to do in the course of innovating within an organization, or in terms of the creation of a new innovative product or service? And what do they need to do through the course of that innovation process? And that's essentially what we did. And we used those building blocks, those tasks, in order to then determine, well, what are the skills that underpin the effective delivery of those tasks? And that's the basis on which we built the framework. I put in here one of the things that we've presented this to lots of kind of stakeholders within Innovate UK, with organisations, with doctoral training centres, and so on. And we've had it pulled apart and critiqued and so on. And one of the things that we come across, and it's also in lots of frameworks of skill, is, well, what about things like leadership? Quite often you'll see leadership skills identified within certain frameworks, particularly entrepreneurship frameworks, for example. entrepreneurial leadership skills, or networking skills. And we thought, well, is that a primary colour skill? Is that something? And we decided that actually that's not terribly helpful. And actually, what is the ability to network, for example, the ability to lead effectively, is actually predicated on the development of a set of skills, which actually combined create that ability. So it's about the product of sets of skills across different groups. So really what we kind of thought was the kind of structure of this was actually that we wanted to identify a set of skills which actually educational providers in particular could identify within their programs, and they could design curricula, pedagogy and so on in order to develop a set of skills that could then be applied to a particular set of tasks that would drive innovation, which will in turn create value. And that's not commercial value necessarily. It could be social value. It could be value within organizations. It could be efficiencies and so on. So it's a kind of the creation of a framework which enables organizations to think quite clearly about that sequence of things. I won't say a lot about this particular slide because it gets a bit off track, but just to talk more about the process really. As I said, we started at the starting point was not skills, it was about the innovation process and understanding, okay, well, what does the innovation process look like? And thought, well, actually, we need to differentiate between those people that do the innovating and those people that create the conditions under which innovation can take place. So innovation execution and innovation management. And so the framework tackles both of those areas. So one is at the level of the innovation itself. And again, that could be a product or a process or a business model. It can be from nothing, or it could be within the context of a highly complex organization. But ultimately, the innovation process requires an engagement with those because it needs both the conditions and the innovation itself to take place, and that there is a kind of relationship. And the reason why there's lots of those circles there was actually this is not meant to be a linear sequence, but actually from kind of prospecting, the ideation phase, selecting amongst ideas and then implementing them. It's much more iterative and so on. And then off the back of that process, this is not an exclusive, comprehensive list or an exhaustive list rather. It's on the basis of this innovation process. Well, actually, okay, well, what are the tasks required at each of these phases? What are the things that need to take place in order to progress from prospecting all the way through to implementation? And so this is a select kind of a summary. And of course, underneath all of these are a whole range of very specific tasks, but also a whole range of very specific knowledge as well. So if we talk about something like the management of intellectual property, that requires a good working knowledge of legislation and regulations around intellectual property and so on. We're not really concerned about that necessarily, but what are the skills that require someone that enable someone to be more effective at that particular task or set of tasks? And so from that set of tasks, we created we have these slightly more sort of horrific alluvial diagrams, which look at the connection between our framework, which I'll come to in a minute, which is far simpler than this would suggest. But the groups of skills that we've identified as being core, the specific skills themselves in the middle left, to the particular tasks, and then through to the phases of the innovation process. So the idea was to create to map the relationship between skills at the group level, collective level, or the individual level, with also a particular set of tasks as they are related to a particular set of a particular process in the innovation journey, if you like. So our framework is essentially boils down to this. And as you can see, if you kind of, there are 5 broad groups of skills we identified as being connected to the innovation process, or as I say, made makes the delivery of tasks associated with the innovation more likely to be successful. So we have conceptual skills, concerned with the relationship between the abstract and the concrete, and that's the basis for evaluation. Evaluative skills, again, cognitive skills concerned with the ongoing process of information as the basis for action. So clearly sequencing from conceptual skills. So conceptual skills includes things like creativity, evaluative skills, critical analysis, horizon scanning, and so on. A whole range of skills, and I'll come on to the specific skills in a second, although there's quite a lot of them. So I'll do that briefly. Implementation skills. So even though we're not concerned with technical skills per se, so for example, the ability to code or the ability to, or that's particularly related to a particular technology, these are more technical skills, but they are ubiquitous across organizations and contexts. They're associated with the active planning and undertaking of innovation, execution, and management. So in a sense, they are kind of probably as close as you get to those kind of employability skills quite often that we talked about, I mentioned earlier on. Then you have relational skills, interpersonal and social skills, and then you've got critical self-reflection skills. And we thought again a lot about this, about the extent to which these are considered skills. And going back to our definition about the sense that these are skills that are developable and that people can get better at these things over time with practice and guidance, we felt they certainly were. So it's about understanding oneself in the midst of an innovation kind of process. So, in other words, there are sets of skills which inform how one relates to sets of activities, concepts and ideas, information and data, others, and oneself. So those are the kind of five core groups. And one of the things that we debated quite a lot in this, and we kind of were slightly nervous about, was actually, well, this just seems like being a kind of relatively sort of functioning human being in any context, irrespective of its application to innovation. We thought, have we just developed a framework for skill, irrespective of kind of context and irrespective of the idea of innovation? And came back to the conclusion, actually, the innovation skills framework in itself might look reasonably generic, but it's its application to tasks that's more useful. And so this is the framework itself, presented as a skills wheel. And you can see, therefore, that in each of these skills groups, there are a set of component skills. So within conceptual thinking, as that kind of, if you like, that first stage, which is very closely associated with that prospecting and ideation phase, then abstract thinking, creativity, mental agility, synthesis, and systems thinking, we consider to be kind of, as I say, primary color skills, the building blocks of those kind of, on which the success of those particular tasks associated with that phase are predicated. Component skills, forecasting, knowledge brokering, modeling, organization, prioritization, and resource evaluation. I won't go through all of these because they're pretty self-evident, but for something like critical self-reflection, there are some models of critical self-reflection, and we've adopted some of those. About is an interesting area. It's, in a sense, around emotional intelligence in lots of ways, that idea of emotional intelligence. So it's about external self-awareness and understanding the impact of your actions on others. And then internal self-awareness, understanding one's own biases, values, beliefs, those sorts of things in terms of understanding the way in which they might influence your actions, and then the ability to self-regulate. So I won't spend a huge amount of time, but that's the innovation skills. And I think there are something like I don't know, I forgot, I lose track of how many skills there are that make up the skills framework. But as I said, I think the value of this is not so much in that list of relatively generic skills, although I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, particularly if you're looking to apply these and develop these skills in educational settings. We've kind of taken pains to define exactly what we mean when we're talking about the skills groups, the component skills, but also the different definitions of the component skills as applied to these two phases of innovation execution and innovation management. So if we take, for example, synthesis, the ability to integrate information from multiple sources to formulate conclusions as the basis for action, that means different things: innovation execution, the act of doing the innovation, and innovation management, the act of enabling innovation. So it might be an organization, it might be a manager in an organization, seeking to create innovative conditions. So you can see that the definition is slightly different. So the framework really is not only the skills themselves, but also how they're applied to these two particular areas. Sorry, just checking on time. So if we zoom in on the framework, then we can see that sort of writ large. So conceptual skills, creativity, and then innovation execution and innovation management. And then you'll see at the bottom of there the particular tasks that we've identified this skill as underpinning. So, for example, in innovation execution, creativity is associated with obviously things like concept creation, idea generation, concept development, vision socialization, and project socialization. Whereas in innovation management, for example, it has an application in some of those areas because there would be a role of innovation managers in that, but also harder, if you like, areas of activity like resource deployment, creative use of resources, creative use of finances, creative use of human resources, but also creativity around the strategic positioning of that innovation within or outside that organization. So just to come on to its kind of use. So as I said, we were originally asked to develop the innovation skills framework by Innovate UK and IFATE. So in terms of our task, it was really about actually creating something that can be used in an educational setting or in relation to qualifications or development programs. And of course, the ISF, as I'll say in a minute, has been used in that way. So that second point around developing skill, it can be used and has been used to evaluate qualifications. So to what extent are these qualifications of different levels developing the skills that we need in order to make people innovative in that particular context? Or it can be used as a kind of, which I think is quite interesting given where we are now and the primacy of skill, about actually let's use this as the, or skills themselves as the basis of the qualification, rather than typically I would start with the kind of knowledge base that we want to develop amongst students, then we overlay that with skills. Arguably there is a need at this moment in time to develop programs from the bottom up, from a kind of skills-led perspective. But also it could be human resource development within organizations. So one of the things that we've been working on with a group of FE colleges, looking at their programs, level 3 and level 4 diploma programs, to evaluate them against the framework. But also they're interested in developing a training program for their staff. So not only should the students become more prone, if you like, to innovation, but also the staff need to become as well. So actually could be used to develop skill within organizations. But in talking to people, and this happened last week when I presented the framework, there's also been identified, the value of using this as a tool for organizational evaluation, or indeed individual evaluation, to assess individuals against the framework. So, to help organizations understand the alignment between current and required skills of individuals, roles, organizational units as the basis for development. And also, in kind of HR, we talk about kind of making or buying skill. Either you develop the skill yourself or you bring it in from the outside, and actually sourcing skill into the organization, or sourcing particular types of applicants to particular roles. The framework is also perhaps useful in terms of actually developing role descriptions of profile, person specifications, and so on, and as the means for candidate selection as well. So we feel that it has a role there, and that seems to be borne out with the conversations that we've had with possible users. So as I said, the framework is sort of it's out there at the moment, it's being applied. So it is a central tenet of IFATE's future-facing innovation strategy, with a commitment to look at all apprenticeship provision through the lens of the innovation skills framework and so on. As I said, we're working with a large further education college group at the moment, doing some train-the-trainer sessions to get them comfortable with mapping the innovation skills framework to their courses. And interestingly, there have been other incidences of FE colleges coming across the framework and adopting it as the basis on which to evaluate their programs or to develop their programs. So in one particular case, health and social care students, level 4 on a diploma, or technologies in health and social care was another program they looked at. And the great thing about that is the fact that I've done some broad mapping around the kind of business school context, when you would expect us to be developing lots of the skills here, particularly at degree level. But actually, it does bear out the efficacy of the framework in relation to lower levels qualifications, but also in areas where we might not consider innovation to be key, but they're very, very keen to make sure that, you know, if you are in a kind of health and social care situation, there may be a need to think kind of laterally about how you deal with particular scenarios within that things in making decisions about someone's care, or indeed developing the ability to understand need and so on, all of which build these are kind of predicated on the development of lots of the skills in the framework. And then, as I said, where we are now is we've developed a kind of further framework as an extension of this, not as a replacement, which is the ICE framework, to incorporate commercialization entrepreneurship skills. And I'm not going to talk about this to any great extent, but I just thought I would show you a little bit of that. You'll see that it looks relatively similar, the innovation skills framework. It's been developed to a little extent and so on, but its real application is, as I said, in the relationship between tasks and skills. And so we have the additional, this is quite a horrific diagram really, but an additional input in terms of the 3 different domains. So innovation, commercialization, entrepreneurship. But again, the relationship, the key relation, the building blocks of the framework are around tasks and the kind of the skills component. So in a sense, the innovation skills framework is standalone still, but also has been subsumed into this wider framework. And in relation to, and again, we've adopted a similar approach in terms of actually for the innovation, commercialization, entrepreneurship phases of the kind of of this kind of process, if you like, sought to define all of the skills as they apply to the particular areas. So if we talk about innovation as being associated with ideas, commercialization as opportunities, sorry, the other way around, entrepreneurship associated with opportunities and market associated with commercialization, then creativity is applied in different ways, but ultimately as a skill or component skill, it is kind of fundamental to all of those different sets of tasks that you can see there. So I suppose in very quick conclusion, I think what I hope I've kind of articulated, I think was not only the kind of, you know, the work that we've done in this particular area, and it would be useful to get your views on that, but also to highlight some of the challenges around kind of the educational context in a policy context where education providers are expected to deliver an awful lot in terms of skills development, preparing people to be innovative and all sorts of things on top of everything else, but are slightly hamstrung with the fact that, to put it bluntly, government is and some organisations aren't terribly keen to define their terms in the way that we would sort of expect students to.
Yeah, as my wife's a teacher, and you know, I've also got an autistic nephew. I just wondered, with the FE colleges and the schools you're working with, you know, how are they targeting low socioeconomic background students and then people with SEN needs to kind of, catch them early and get them in that kind of skills pipeline. And because they're the ones I feel that there's a lot of barriers to kind of ensuring that those people are supported and they've got access to all these opportunities.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. As I said, I think we tried to develop the framework so it was inclusive, so it doesn't actually, I think overlay a kind of set of assumptions about what it is to be innovative or what it is to be entrepreneurial or whatever it might be, so that these could be applied across a whole range of different levels. So one of the things that the college group we're working with and is about badging their programs, as mapped against the innovation skills framework. So it helps, I think, all learners to articulate the value of their program in quite simple terms in lots of ways, because the framework itself is on face value relatively simple. So it helps students articulate their employability. So it's not just about I've got a diploma in assistive healthcare technologies, for example, but I've also developed these sets of, for want of a better phrase, transferable skills. So I think it's another lens by which I think I'm quite conscious as a dean of the business school, kind of innovation, kind of overload of, another thing to think about when you're developing a program. But I think it does help to cut through some of the things and to help both learners and the colleges articulate the value of their program, so that then those people can then articulate it to employers in particular.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, really interesting. I've downloaded the document.
Okay, good. Yeah.
It's a very thorough stuff. And I mean, just two or three sort of questions rolled together, really, because innovation is, it's an attribute of the group rather than the individual. It's almost impossible for an individual to be innovative as a job, which is part of the challenge here. And so that there's in terms of employers, there's a whole load of things that they need to do in terms of creating the structures and the systems to encourage innovation. And skills is only one part of that. And kind of where I'm going with this is that the key unit of analysis in one sense is not the individual or the skills. It's the group, and it's the roles that people play and how they're put together that support innovation. And so what I'm thinking of, you're probably familiar with the Sophia framework. I know it's not referenced in the document, the skills framework for the information age. And what's really interesting about that is how, they look at skills, but they also bundle them together in a increasingly, evolving set of roles, which vary according to seniority. And I know it's always easy to take your favorite skills framework and say it should look a bit more like this, but there's a complementary project to this, which is to look at the roles that are needed and how these skills come together in different roles across different levels of seniority to support innovation. And the challenge for the employers and managers of organizations is understanding what those roles should look like, how they should be put together, and using these skills to inform the employee specification. So it's a follow-on project that I think it's crying out for, and it sort of fits somewhere between something like Sophia and what you've got now.
Yeah, it's a really interesting observation. I completely agree. I think we tried to present it, and we intended the framework to be effectively modular. So I talked about things like leadership skills and the fact that you can take a bunch of skills and put them together and develop that capacity. And I think the same thing, as you say, applies to both individuals and roles. So what capabilities do I need in my particular role in order to be more innovative in my role, or at least to make it more likely that I will be innovative in my role? But equally, it could be applied to the group as well. So the composition. So you're absolutely right that if it's, if there is in terms of innovation execution in particular, then different roles play different responsibilities within the wider group, and they might not all necessarily need to be very have great aptitude in all of these particular skills necessarily. but in combination they will. So I think you're right, and I think that's, so it can be sliced up. So if you like, I think what we try to do is create a framework which is at that sort of base level, that actually, and this was what iFate were intending to do with it, essentially, to take, okay, well, let's take an apprenticeship, a level 4 apprenticeship in whatever it might be. Let's think about what the skills might be based on this framework that individual needs to develop, and then how do we build that into the curriculum? How do we even, for example, assess skills, which is increasingly difficult, which is very, very difficult, particularly some of the skills that we've flagged. So yeah, it's a very good point. And I think we've come across a number of other frameworks that in other ways that sort of have a kind of a sort of almost a tiered structure. We've got 2 tiers in terms of the groups and the component skills, but even further skills, and break those down too. But we wanted something that was slightly more simple, to the point that we started to doubt whether we were doing anything much at all, really, than simply listing some, as I said, attributes of functioning people in organizations. But thank you for that. It's a really interesting observation. Omar, I think, was next.
Yes, thank you, Nick. That was really interesting. We might be inviting you for our next Ricochet to present the topic.
Absolutely, I've got the ICE framework to.
Yeah. So just like was thinking out loud about slide on starting point that you have mentioned. Do you think we can say that the 2 anchors, skills and tasks? So you mentioned development, skills, task, and so on until we reach innovation. Can we say that skills and tasks can be somehow interchangeable within the timeline or process? So either sequence could be effective in a way in achieving innovation. For example, like development, task, skills, or development, skills, task as it stands now. Just thinking, sometimes we learn and develop some skills through specific tasks. I'd like to know, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because it comes down to that kind of, if you like, I think all organizations are thinking about things like this, talking about efficiencies within organizations, about, you can either tackle the people, or you can tackle the processes. And in a sense, the processes are the sort of tasks. So you can develop the tasks, certainly, if you have poor processes or poor systems, or the tasks are defined in such a way that they make innovation more difficult, then you're not going to get innovation, no matter how skilled people might be in the things that we've identified as important. So I think, yeah, the 2 things we certainly consider them to be not interchangeable as such, but very much kind of concomitant. That actually there's a strong relationship between the 2. That you can, if you get the skills right and you get the construction of tasks, or the way that those tasks fit into a process or a system, then you can create the conditions when innovation is more likely to happen. And I keep coming back to that phrase about more likely to happen, because I think innovation just doesn't happen, but people can have a set of skills what makes it more likely to happen. But I think you're right. I think actually the development bit is about the skills, but you're right. I think you could also sort of flip it and actually talk about the development of the tasks in order to make sure that the skills can be fully utilized for innovation. So that's a very, very interesting point. And one of the other diagrams we've got is actually to reverse if you like, the flow, and actually look at it from a task perspective rather than a skills perspective. So you can read the framework from either direction, if you like. Thanks for that, Omar.
Thanks.
Shola, I think Shola's next.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Nick, for your presentation. I think my question is linked to that skills and task, but I wanted to ask, because you mentioned the ICE framework on commercialization and entrepreneurship skill. I do research on women's spin-out in another context in Nigeria, higher education. And I just wonder, whether you have actually applied this ICE framework within our university commercialization process, and what is the outcome, and whether it can be applied, transferred to another context. So that's my question, really, because I think it's quite an interesting one to look at. I'm at that stage of, the question I was asked about, the task and then developing the task first, and then try to now identify the skills that are needed. So I would like you to kind of maybe expand on that, on how you have applied this framework, within our own universal commercialization, and whether it can be applied, within another context.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're at that stage now with the ICE framework that we've sort of presented it. I presented it at an event last week called World Skills, and there was quite a lot of interest in it from there. So I'm hoping that some application will stem from that. I think with applying it in the university, I thought quite a lot about this. I think there's something quite interesting around the ICE framework in particular, and it stems from someone's comment following our most recent all-school meeting, was around we need to develop a more commercial mindset amongst faculty. And I thought, well, okay, we've had this framework. We could use that as the base for analysis. And as I said earlier on, it's not just about our learners, and our students perhaps need to do this stuff. We can embed this in programs, and we do that all the time for different frameworks and competency maps and things like that. But actually as a means by which we can develop staff across the university to actually say, okay, well, what does it mean to be commercial? How do we develop these skills and so on? So I'm slightly hesitant about doing it as sort of dean at the moment, because as I said, there is this danger of kind of innovation, intervention or initiative overload, and there's a lot going on. But I think it's an interesting thing that I'd be really keen to explore. I think in terms of applying it across contexts, one of the great things about working with FE colleges is that it's a very different context. They're very different set of priorities, and different types of programs, and we're able to work across levels. I've mapped it on degree programs, and we've spoken to people about PhD development programs as well. But that having FE, I think, is really useful. So we've got that kind of range of application. I think in terms of applying it in quite different contexts for individual development, whether it's overseas or whether it's with particular communities, I would hope that it would translate, because of the way that we've sought to design it, that it doesn't make any assumptions or kind of, I guess, cultural assumptions about what these things are. They are very kind of defined at the level at which I think they would apply across a whole range of different contexts. So, and I think that was really important for us. So if you have a kind of a community of practice, Shola, that you'd like to kind of explore this with, then we can talk about that, because I think that would be a really interesting kind of project to actually take out of an educational setting and into a kind of entrepreneurial kind of context to actually test that and so on. So thanks for the question, Shola. But yeah,
thank you.
Let's discuss. Rob, I think it's time for one more question.
Thanks, Nick. Nick, you started off by saying about at universities, colleges, we teach employability skills, or we develop employability skills, and say, yep, there's a thread through our curriculum that does this, and there's I suppose not a connection with employers. I was just wondering whether this framework could be used, rather than using Bloom's taxonomy and that kind of thing, whether we use this as a framework within programs to really map employability skills, be they however they're termed, whether they're hard skills, soft skills, or whatever, and kind of use it to help that that translation, if you want, from an educational setting to a commercial setting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're very much, and this is, so I have applied it to some of our programs. So I've mapped it to our undergraduate B&M program, but the innovation skills framework, not the ICE framework, and so on. And I, identified where there are gaps, and and I think there is, and I think in terms of the clear articulation of the value of programs, I think it could be really helpful. And as I said, one of the things I'm really interested in, and I'd love to try, is this kind of skills up, kind of skills led or skills first approach to curriculum development. Actually, let's start with the skills rather than overlaying them, rather than doing the mapping. So you do the curriculum builder rather than a curriculum mapper. And I'll share the mapping with you, Rob. Just you might be interested in what I've done. But I think yeah, the value, because it does seem to resonate with employers as well. And again, we've tested it with certain employers that we've been connected with through Innovate, and it seems to have some sort of resonance there. So in terms of that articulation of employability to employers, and indeed, as you say, the kind of backwards as well, actually talking to employers and saying, are you getting this stuff from our graduates? And if they're saying no, let's do more of that. So actually, it perhaps is a kind of a intermediary in that kind of conversation, if you like, between employers and providers. But yeah, more testing on that to come, I think. So I'm just conscious of time. We've hit 1 o'clock, and I just wanted to say before we break off, to say thank you for everyone for coming. Really appreciate it.